Thanks for joining us this morning for this webinar on the X5. It's roughly about 17 minutes or so the presentation, and we can get to any questions you have at the end.
Welcome to today's tutorial. Let's get started. Let's have a look at our agenda for today. Today we are looking at the X5 all-in-one controller. We'll start off with an overview of the X5 and then we'll talk about its basic features and functions. Then we'll do a video tour of the product to talk about the different hardware features. And we'll look in detail at the specifications as well as how the X5 fits in the OCS product line. And then finally we'll talk about where to use the X5. Then, as always, we'll finish with the Q&A session. So now let's give an overview of the X5. The X5 is one of many models of OCS all-in-one controllers that we have at Horner. The X5 has characteristics of both the Micro OCS family and the XL series family. It also happens to be the first Horner OCS we ever released with a 4.3-inch touchscreen, and also the first Horner OCS that doesn't use a battery for variable or register retention. From a basic features and function standpoint, the X5, like all Horner OCS all-in-one controllers, is configured in Cscape. Our all-in-one controllers have the functionality of control, user interface, I/O, and networking all built in. From a control standpoint, like all OCS products, the X5 supports either our advanced ladder or the IEC 61131 programming languages. It has a 480 by 272 resolution color touchscreen. And for I/O, it supports 4 built-in DC inputs that all have high-speed counting capability. Then it has 4 DC outputs, 2 of which support high-speed output capability like PWM for instance. It also has 4 analog inputs. From a networking standpoint, it has serial ports, a CAN port, and an Ethernet port. Now let's look at some of the hardware. The X5 has the same microprocessor as you'll find in our XL series products for the XL4 and up. It uses a unique memory structure for storing variables and executing variables called FRAM. FRAM does not require a battery for variable retention. Without power, FRAM will retain its values. However, with FRAM, there is less storage space than with a flash and RAM, and it's not quite as fast as RAM. So there are some trade-offs which we'll cover in detail. The X5 does have a battery, but only a coin cell for the calendar clock. No rechargeable battery is required for any kind of variable retention. Next, let's take a video tour of the X5. Here's my X5 controller. As you can see from the top, the screen is nearly as large as the overall package. It's a 480 by 272 resolution, and you'll notice no physical function keys, but we do have virtual function keys. If I press in the upper right hand corner, you'll see the function keys slide out as well as the system button. If I need to go to the system menu, I can access it this way. If I want to access function keys, I can do that as well. As soon as I touch anywhere outside of that area, they disappear again. Now let's look at other sides of the product. At the top we have a memory card slot, and on one side we have our programming port, which is mini USB. Then here we have 3 dip switches, which I'll talk about in a minute. Now let's flip it over and look at the back. We'll start with the I/O. We have a 10-pin connector here, and we have a removable connector for our digital inputs that are all high-speed capable, and also analog inputs which you can configure between 4 to 20 milliamps and 0 to 10 volts. Then on this side we have our 4 digital outputs, the first 2 of which are high-speed capable. These are removable spring clamp connectors. They are designed so you can pop that connector out just like that. Some of you may be more used to screw type connectors. These spring clamps make it a lot easier to install and uninstall cabling. Now let's talk about wire gauge. For the X5, I recommend that you use something like 18 gauge, as it is a more appropriate in size for these controllers than 14 gauge for instance. In my case, I have a ferrule installed, and you can actually install this wire without even having to use a tool. When you want to pop it out, you can use your screwdriver to take it out. and when you pop that wire in, it's not going anywhere unless you want to remove it. Something important to note is that I've crimped this ferrule using a flat crimper tool. This provides a nice flat crimp because the openings in this terminal strip are rectangular, so we want a flat crimp. You don't want one of these crimpers that has more of a square type result because the wires will go in but they won't come out as easy as they should. Now let's look at communications. Here we have 3 communication ports on the back, and they all use modular jacks and they're all a different color. This black modular jack marked MJ1/2 is actually 2 serial ports in a single connector. So that's one RS232 port and one RS45 port, again in a single connector, and you can route different signals to 2 different locations to take advantage of both parts simultaneously. You can also use one of these modular adapters that converts a modular connection over to a terminal block. We sell these at Horner, and for that you put it in and now you have access to the wires individually through terminal blocks. This one down here is the CAN connector. In a lot of our products we have an open terminal strip connection for CAN, but in some of our smaller products we started using an RJ45 connection and we follow the CAN standard for that connector. The RS45 and CAN networks both require termination. This is where the dip switches come in. One of the switches is allocated for RS45 and the other one is for CAN. So if the X5 is on the end of either the CAN network or the RS45 network, you can just flip that relevant dip switch. We also have an Ethernet port here with the traditional LEDs. Finally, we have a full-sized USB-A port. This can be used for a variety of functions. You could use a USB flash drive and transfer files back and forth between the micro SD and the USB flash drive, or you could also plug in a USB video camera if, for example, you want the operator to be able to see in a certain place inside the machine that they can't see from their point of view in front of the screen. You could also use that USB port to connect to our Horner Wi-Fi adapter to provide a unique Wi-Fi network for the X5, or it can help the X5 communicate over an existing Wi-Fi network. Next, let's look at the specifications for the X5 as well as where it fits in the Horner product line. First, let's briefly talk about the 2 main Horner product lines as of now. On the left, you have the Micro OCS family. This is our entry-level product line and is what we consider the best all-in-one controllers for simple applications. If you have a straightforward application and the I/O complement of the Micro OCS works well for you, the Micro OCS will be a great fit for your application. If you need a bit more power, speed, and a bit more size in terms of variables or memory, or maybe you just need some additional protocols that aren't necessarily as common as others, in that case you'll have the XL series OCS available to you, which is our best-in-class all-in-one controller product line. So where does the X5 fit in these 2 product families? To answer this, let's start going through the different functions of these all-in-one controllers, starting with logic and comparing the X5 versus the Micro OCS and the XL series. The X5 logic specs in general are most similar to the XL series. They're the same for program memory and have a similar logic scan rate. The areas where it varies comes down to the X5's unique FRAM memory. The FRAM means that there can be less retained variables and a slightly slower logic scan rate. The key differences between the XL series and the X5 in terms of those variable sizes are highlighted in red. Next, let's look at the built-in I/O. Here the X5 is quite unique. The 4-in digital, 4-in analog, 4-out digital configuration is unique to the X5. The Micro OCS has anywhere from 26 to 30 I/O points built in. Those are the only 2 choices. However, with the XL series you have 6 different choices of I/O combinations, all the way up to 24-in and 16-out, and all the way up to 6-in and 4-out. One advantage with the X5 compared to the Micro OCS series is for the analog inputs, where you have your selection in configuration between 4 to 20 mA and 0 to 10 volts. That can be configured on a channel by channel basis and there's no jumpers to set. For high-speed counting, the high-speed counting capability of the X5 is identical to that of the XL series. Now let's look at and compare the user interface specs. Here we'll mainly compare the 4-inch X4 from the Micro OCS series and the XL4, which is a 3.5-inch model from the XL series, and we'll compare all that against the X5. The X5 has a 480 by 272 resolution, which is the same as the X4. The X5 has the slide-out virtual keys as opposed to the physical keys which you'll find on the XL series for the most part. From a graphics memory standpoint, the X5 and the XL4 have 120 megabytes of graphics memory, while there's much less memory than that for the Micro OCS series. The same goes for number of screens per project and number of objects per screen. Keep in mind, if you compare the Micro OCS series against its similar competition, it is actually much better in those areas. It's just when you compare it against the X5 and the XL series you can see the limitations. We also have full screen video playback available with the X5 with the correct firmware version. You can also do that with the XL series at 320 by 240 resolution. You have to go up to the 15-inch in the XL series before you can get a greater resolution than 320 by 240. Now let's talk about communications and networking. Here the X5 is nearly identical to the XL series in terms of its capabilities. The only area where the XL series has additional capability is when you're talking about the larger models that can support 2 wired 10100 Ethernet ports, while there's only 1 wired port available with the X5. Other than that, everything else is the same. Highlighted in red is the protocol support. We support a lot of protocols with the XL series and the X5. That's true for both serial ports as well as industrial Ethernet protocols. Finally, we'll look at peripherals. The X5 operating system is a custom version of Linux, just like the XL series. Here, the main thing is the presence of that USB-A port or that USB host port on the X5, just like on the XL series. Everything else is straightforward and included on most of the products. Now let's discuss where the X5 fits in the product line. Here I'll use a traffic light system to compare different aspects, with green meaning that they're the same, yellow meaning that they're similar, and red meaning that they're different. So is the X5 a Micro OCS? Well, let's start with the package. It's the same size as the X4. All the connections for the most part are on the back, and it has the form factor that matches the Micro OCS, so that box is checked. For logic scan, the X5 is faster than the Micro OCS. Unless you have a small program, you'll find that the Micro OCS, which has a lower base scan rate, is a little quicker. But for a medium size or large size program, the X5 has more power. From a memory standpoint, they're not the same, but they are close. They both don't have as much variable memory as the XL series, but they are similar. I/O wise, they're very different. The X5 has a unique 4+4+4 complement for high-speed counting, and for networking, the X5 is much more capable. Now let's compare the X5 against the XL series. Starting with the package, the XL series is bigger, and most of the connections from an I/O standpoint are around the peripheral of the product, so they're different in that respect. For logic scan, they're close. I mentioned the fact that the FRAM is slightly slower on the X5, so it's not quite as fast as the XL series, but scan rate wise it's quite similar. Memory wise, the XL series has a lot more memory from a variable standpoint. Program memory is the same, but variable memory is different enough to give it a red mark to say that they're different. For I/O complement, the X5 is unique in that respect, so they are different. For high-speed counting and also for networking, the X5 and the XL series are identical. So that's the results of our comparison. So what is the conclusion? Well, the conclusion is that, as the title of today's webinar states, the X5 is a unique all-in-one controller, and it's hard to classify as either a Micro OCS or as part of the XL series. However, we do have to classify it so we can put it on our website, and we need to put it in Cscape so that you can find it when you're doing an offline configuration. So in those two cases, we do put the X5 under Micro OCS. Now let's look at different situations in which you can use the X5. The X5 is good for applications where you don't have a lot of I/O and applications where space is at a premium, especially if you don't have a lot of depth. It's also great in applications where communications are important, especially Wi-Fi or BACnet, which is Building Automation and Control Network, which is popular for communications within building automation applications. You can also take advantage of the X5's video capabilities in your applications, for example, for helping operators with help or support videos on how to use your machine. Finally, it's good for applications with 12-volt DC power. The X5 works at both 12 volts and 24 volts, whereas the Micro OCS series, for example, is 24 volt only. Next, let's look at applications where the X5 might not fit as well. With applications with a lot of local I/O that you need to be all built in, the X5 is probably not the best fit, and you have other options that have a lot more I/O. However, don't let the total amount of I/O be a problem, especially if it's distributed, as you can always add expansion I/O to the X5. For applications that have a large number of retentive variables, the X5 may not be the best fit. 1,000 words and 4,000 bits is a lot of retentive variables for a lot of applications, but in certain applications it's not enough. In those cases, an XL series product would be a better choice. Then, of course, for applications that need larger screens, obviously the X5 is not the best choice. Finally, let's look at some example industries where the X5 fits well. So, building automation, HVAC type applications, and lighting control applications are all cases where you don't necessarily have a lot of I/O on an individual peripheral, but you need good communications, and often BACnet support. Food and beverage, agriculture, mobile equipment, and even wastewater are all good examples of industries where the X5 can be a great fit. The X5 is also really the entry level point for MQTT push capabilities in the Horner OCS product line. That's not included in the Micro OCS, so if the Micro OCS is checking a lot of boxes for your application, but you need MQTT push protocol, the X5 could be exactly what you're looking for. So those are a lot of example industries where the X5 has proven already to be a great fit and is successfully used in applications. That concludes our tutorial for today. Thank you for joining me for today's tutorial, and the Q&A session will begin shortly.
Okay, so that's the presentation done. I'm not seeing any questions in currently. Our webinar next week is on an OCS in a 12 volts environment. So if you've any interest in that, the registration link is up on the webinar section of the website. Other than that, thanks for joining us this week, and we do hope to see you again.